Coming up on Tech News Weekly, TechCrunch's Amanda Silberling is here, and she kicks off this week's episode talking about a new baseball team in the Bay Area that's been founded by a startup founder. Then I talk about how Meta has admitted to feeding all of our public posts since 2007 into its AI. After that, Moren of SixColors stops by to give us an understanding, a nice summary of the Apple event, plus things we might have missed, before we round things out with Kyle Orland of Ars Technica, who joins us to help us understand why that new PS5, the PS5 Pro, costs so much money. All of that coming up on Tech News Weekly.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 353, with Amanda Silberling and me, Mikah Sargent, recorded Thursday, September 12th, 2024. The PS5 Pro costs how much? Hello and welcome to Tech News Weekly, the show where every week we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news. I am your host, Mikah Sargent, and it is the second Thursday of the month, which means I am joined by the wonderful, the super cool, it's Amanda Silberling. Hello, Amanda.
Hello, how's it going? Other than off mic, I just tried to convince you to buy a $30 squirrel mug, so we're off to a great start here.
I'm feeling great. You know, it's a good start to the day after we kind of talked about both feeling a little exhausted. What can solve that but a little bit of retail therapy? And speaking of retail therapy, interestingly, apparently, you can just use the money that you have to, if you can't buy something, build it. This is me trying to do an introduction to your story of the week.
Oh, I was like, did Mikah discover what money does? So the thing is, so you get a paycheck, and then if you need things, you can use that money, and it's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool how that works.
When I go to the grocery store, I'm like, here's the money I have earned in exchange for goods. Yeah. So, all right. In all seriousness, my story of the week is about a startup founder in Oakland named Paul Friedman, who, like many people in Oakland, who particularly sports fans, he was sad because the Oakland A's baseball team is moving to Las Vegas, but first stopping in Sacramento for a weird time. But it's the third professional sports team to leave Oakland in the last 5 years, which is devastating. And he was like, you know what? I might not have $1.2 billion to buy the Oakland A's, but I probably could cobble the money together to form a Pioneer League baseball team. So now, instead of the Oakland A's, there is now a team in Oakland called the Oakland Bees, which is part of the Pioneer League, which is like similar to the minor leagues, but not affiliated with an MLB team. And why is this a tech story, you might ask? I think it's a tech story because Paul is using all of the things he learned as being an ed tech founder with multiple exits to apply that to starting a very different type of business than what we usually talk about, which is a professional sports team, but not an MLB team. And I think it's a cool story thinking about how, like, all the things that he used to talk to startups about, like getting capital that aligns with your own vision and goals as a founder, that is now applying to his situation, where they just did a whole crowdfunding thing where they raised $1.2 million from 2,200 fans together, not like per fan. That would be excessive. And so that's like a very aligned source of capital because the fans want the same thing that he wants, which is a good baseball team in Oakland that is fun and cares about its fans. And I just think that this was a fun story, and I like baseball, and I like sticking it to the man. And in this case, the man is a billionaire sports owner who is not respecting the wishes of the community.
Yeah, so let's talk about this, because one thing that, I mean, if you don't pay attention to sports, then you might not be familiar with uh, the way that it works. Like getting up and just leaving a city, is it typically done because the team isn't making enough money in that place? Is it because talent doesn't want to move to that city? Is it because they feel like, you know, the name that's attached to the team, like the city name that's attached to the team, makes a difference in terms of respectability? Like why do people keep leaving Oakland?
I think it has to do with the money of it all. It varies from team to team, but I think with the A's, it was like if they built this stadium in Las Vegas, then I think there were like incentives to move to Vegas, and the Oakland Raiders, the NFL team, also is now the Las Vegas Raiders. And you see this with other teams like
More like the
I
Las
grew
Vegas Traders. Sorry.
a like I grew up a fan of the Marlins, and because I lived in Florida, and they would win a World Series and then sell all the good players, because then you could get a lot of money for the players, because everyone was like, wow, they're so good, they just won the World Series. And then it becomes more profitable for the owners of sports teams sometimes to like treat it as purely a business rather than trying to actually win games. And then for the fans, that's very frustrating. And another point that Paul Friedman made when I talked to him was how like sports really are important to the morale of a city. And he mentioned specifically like when you go to a sporting event and you're taking public transit home from the event, and you're just on the train with a bunch of sports fans that were just coming from the same thing you were at. And it's rare to be on public transit where random people are talking to each other in a friendly way and not just like looking on their phones or talking to people in an unfriendly way, which that happens in Philadelphia. And I do think he has a point that this is really like an asset to the community to have something to rally around, even if like people that aren't really sports fans might not get it, but it's something that brings people together and gives you like a shared kind of identity and goal as a community.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that is part of it. And that, I know in your piece, one of the sort of subheads was community as the product, because it is interesting to take startup know-how and apply it to something that maybe traditionally doesn't have that aspect. Is this a money-making venture for the startup founder, or is this more of a like just a fun risk? Because it didn't sound like they raised a whole lot of money from just the fans directly. Is it one of these situations where, like in a movie theater, most of the money comes from the concessions that you get whenever the teams are playing, and so it's a slow burn? Where does the money come into play here?
Yeah, I think it's a bit more of a slow burn, although the founder did tell me that they're hoping to be break even next year and then hopefully grow more beyond that. But I think like with startups, you have these companies that are getting like $10 million of investment, and then they're like, oh man, how do we like pay our investors back, because they're investing so much money into like the technology and into like trying to build things that have never been done before. And then in this case, the goals of the company and the way to achieve those goals are a lot more straightforward than like something like Be Real, where it's like, okay, you have all of this funding, but are you ever going to make it back, or are you just going to sell, which is what they did do. Where you want to make a good baseball team, you want to hire staff, you want to build a stadium, you want to make the stadium a good experience for fans. And then another thing they did that I think is interesting is like with like the move to Las Vegas, for example, the A's are building this like $500 million stadium, which is wild, but like you don't have to do that. So they built a stadium for the Oakland Bees that was like like a condemned Little League field that they just like built from the ground up and fully renovated and stuff. And like, yeah, they are a first year Pioneer League baseball team. They don't necessarily have 40,000 fans filling the seats every day, but they have 4,000 seats, and that is nothing to laugh about.
Yeah.
And hopefully
honestly,
over time, yeah. And like the way they built the stadium is so that they could add more seating like over time. Like they did kind of like a modular setup where they can keep building more and more.
Yeah, and that makes sense. There's also some aspect of humanity that really roots for the underdog. And so I could see it just, again, stick it to the man mentality, underdog mentality, all of that I think is helpful in gearing up excitement and getting people to come and check it out and, root for this team that is really just trying to give people a point to rally around. So yeah, there's something triumphant about it. And I hope that it's a success for, all parties involved. I was also curious, like, if you're not major league and you're not minor league where you are associated with major league, it's sort of this other faction. Where do they find is it the baseball players who can't get into and this sounds bad, but I'm genuinely curious, like, they can't get into the minor league team? Do they then go to something like this Pioneer thing? Or is this a wholly separate draw where it's community members who are good baseball players because maybe they played baseball throughout high school or something?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know anything about like where the players typically come from?
Yeah, I think it's somewhere kind of like similar to minor league where it is still a league that is affiliated with the MLB. So you could get like traded, so to speak, or like you could have a deal negotiated so that you go from the Ballers to like the AAA team for an MLB team or something. So it's not like you have to choose Pioneer League or these other like independent MLB affiliated leagues or the minor leagues. And I think it kind of just depends up to the player also, because playing minor league baseball is not a super rewarding job. Like,
right,
the pay is not great. You're traveling around constantly. Like, it seems like a pretty rough life. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's some guys that are just like, maybe there's a different way to do this. Another way that you get people is sometimes there's players that just like need to not be in the minor league system and like try something new to try to like jog them out of a funk. Or maybe if they get like suspended from the MLB for some reason, you see players like going to other countries and being in their leagues.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, sometimes like it can just be like, this guy isn't performing super well in the minors. We're going to send him to the Korean League for a few years, and like maybe the different style of play and the different environment will like jog him out of this slump or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Or you can send him to Oakland.
Yeah, or you can send them. Yeah, it's the new Korea. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break before we come back with my story of the week. I want to tell you about Flashpoint. We're bringing you this episode of Tech News Weekly for Security Leaders 2024. It's been a year like no other. Cyber threats and physical security concerns have honestly continued to just increase. Now, geopolitical instability is adding a new layer of risk and uncertainty. Let's talk numbers. Last year, there was a staggering 84% rise in ransomware attacks and a 34% jump in data breaches. The result? Trillions of dollars in financial losses and threats to safety worldwide. That is where Flashpoint comes in. See, Flashpoint empowers organizations to make mission-critical decisions that will keep their people and their assets safe. So how does it work? Well, by combining cutting-edge technology with the expertise of world-class analyst teams. And with Ignite, Flashpoint's award-winning threat intelligence platform, you get access to critical data, finished intelligence, alerts, and analytics all in one place. You can maximize your existing security investments, Some Flashpoint customers avoid $500 million in fraud loss annually and have a 482% ROI in 6 months. Flashpoint earned Frost & Sullivan's 2024 Global Product Leadership Award for unrivaled threat data and intelligence. And an SVP of cyber operations at a large U.S. financial institution said, quote, Flashpoint saves us over $80 million in fraud losses every year. Their proactive approach and sharp insights are crucial in keeping our financial institutions secure. They're not just a solution, they're a strategic partner helping us stay ahead of cyber threats. So it's no wonder Flashpoint is trusted by both mission-critical businesses and governments worldwide. To access the industry's best threat data and intelligence, visit flashpoint.io today. That's flashpoint.io. And we thank Flashpoint for sponsoring this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. All right, we are back from the break. I am joined by Amanda Silberling of TechCrunch, and it's time for my story of the week. I wanted to talk about a new announcement, revelation that is not entirely, in my opinion, a revelation, and that's where I want to kind of break this down. So Australia basically came full force and made Meta admit to something in a very clear way. For some period of time now, there's been a question of whether Meta was using the data of its users all the way back to 2007 as a means of training its AI. And while at first Meta, by way of its global policy director, rejected the idea that it was doing so, the claim that it was doing so, because of direct confrontation, it resulted in Meta kind of saying, okay, yes. And I want to read this verbatim because I think that it's just good. So this was what Green Party Senator David Shoebridge said in the inquiry with Meta. The truth of the matter is that unless, should I do it in an Austrian? No, I'm just kidding. The truth of the matter is that unless you have consciously set those posts to private since 2007, Meta has just decided that you, being Meta, will scrape all of the photos and all of the texts from every public post on Instagram or Facebook since 2007, unless there was a conscious decision to set them on private. That's the reality, isn't it? And Meta's global privacy director responded by saying, correct. So what that means is that if you have posted to Instagram or Facebook since 2007, and those posts were not set to, well, I should say, were set to public, meaning they weren't set to private, they weren't set to anything other than just public, then those posts have been used to train Meta's AI. Here's the thing to understand, though. In its privacy center, in its blog posts, Meta has for some time said, quote, we use public posts and comments on Facebook and Instagram to train generative AI models for these features and for the open source community. We don't use posts or comments with an audience other than public for these purposes. And I need to give credit to Jess Weatherbed of The Verge, by the way, who has kind of brought this all together. So here's what I want to talk about, because privacy policies have existed, for years and years and years and years and years. And many of us are aware of the fact that when you join a service and you put things on the service, that you are giving that service some means of access to this data. You're putting it into their servers, you're putting it onto their site, you're putting it wherever it happens to be. And so there's going to be action taken with that information. The concern that we're seeing, especially with this inquiry, seemed to surround the idea that, for example, I think it was Labor Party Senator Tony Sheldon who said, what about the public photos that I've posted to Facebook that are photos of me with my kids? Were my kids then used to train your AI? And the Meta's global policy director said, yes, if your post was set to public, it doesn't matter what's in the photo. It was trained for use in AI, or it was used in training of AI. So here's where I want to talk to you, Amanda, about your kind of initial take regarding this. But more importantly, there's a part of me that feels a little annoyed, I guess. And I know this maybe makes me seem kind of elitist or something like that. I don't know what the word is, but maybe makes me seem kind of bad, I guess, in that I'm a little annoyed at this shock and awe mentality that sometimes we see these leaders take, and then even just, me talking to a family member or something, when I say, yeah, this thing that you're not paying for, that you are putting your photos into, they're using your photos for things. It's like, yeah, of course they are. I don't know. Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I think especially with this particular situation of Meta using AI to train, or Meta using our content to train its AI, my reaction to this article was kind of like, yeah, we know. Because we do know. And not just because of the reasons you're saying, where we know that we are the product and that we're being sold ads when we use Meta products, because we know that like this has been something that artists have been in an uproar about for like months. There was like a big artist exodus from Instagram a couple months ago when artists were realizing that you only are able to opt out of this training if you live in the EU because of privacy laws that they have in the EU. So if you're an artist posting like your original illustrations on Instagram, then that is being scraped and used to train. And artists need to be public because that's how they find clients and get work. So like there was a whole big like scuffle about this months ago. And the thing is, I think the news here is that this might be the first time that Meta has outright said, like, yes, we are doing this. Whereas before it was like, well, you can opt out of it, but only if you live in Europe. And it's kind of just like, okay, but so is this happening to us or no? And I guess it is happening to us. We know for sure now.
Yeah, and that's a good point. In terms of the lack of clarity leading up to this and the sort of bouncing around and beating about the bush and trying to kind of dodge and swerve, that's not cool. Not cool, bruh. That does make it feel a little bit more kind of secretive, even if it's in the fine print. By not just coming out straight up and saying this is what's happening, you do then give this opportunity for the moral panic, if that's what it is, that crops up. I guess I've always been told to be careful about what I post online. And that the internet, even when you might not think it's permanent, is permanent. And that if you're using a free service, they're getting you some other way. And that feels like one aspect of this for sure, that, I wouldn't expect anything else from the company. But at the same time, I try to juggle that understanding with some level of empathy for the folks who, for some reason, didn't think that was the case or didn't expect it to go this far. But what's hard for me is figuring out how I want to know how you did not think that your photo, because they're asking Meta. And I don't even think that I'd need to ask Meta this in the first place. You and I we just said this. We kind of knew that this was happening And yes, it's good to hear Meta say it straight out, but like, I just need to know why someone would not think that this would be taking place. And maybe it's the idea that it's a new technology, and so you want to kind of have it reconfirmed upon the introduction of every new technology. But yeah, the second that a company comes out with something, I'm going, okay, the stuff that I'm putting into this is probably being used in some way to improve upon it, unless I explicitly suggest otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just comes down to like tech literacy in general is not as high as it seems when we both work in techie jobs and talk to people who have a much greater than average understanding of how this stuff works.
Yeah.
And then like our parents don't. And that doesn't mean that they don't deserve data privacy, but it's harder to advocate for those things for yourself when you don't know where to even begin.
That's a good way of putting it. That it's the advocacy aspect. Yeah. You don't know. How can there be so much that you don't know, in the words of Pocahontas? And so in that way, yes, my dad wouldn't know that it's not just about not, you're right. I love that. It's not just about not knowing that it's there. It's not knowing, meaning you can't say, I don't want this to happen to me or to my photos. That's probably that makes me feel better about this more than anything else, because it's just been really frustrating seeing this kind of ongoing shock and awe that exists. And maybe in this case, it really is about getting Meta to just put it plainly and say it straight out. And I can't remember where I originally read about this, but on a global scale, I have heard a number of times that Australia is often people from Australia don't like to hear this. And so I have to be careful when the emails start coming in, but I've heard that Australia is kind of a test bed for other first world countries, particularly the United States, for laws, because it's a smaller country. And so you can see how things will play out. And so you'll often see new tech policy come into play. In particular, it's tech policy there. And it's a testing ground to see how things will work out. So we look to Australia a lot of the time. So I thought it was really cool to see Australia pushing at the forefront of this and saying, we're going to get an answer from you, Meta, the US company. I found that very inspiring, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Australia.
Yeah, thanks, Australia.
I think maybe another reason why you're getting frustrated with like the shock and awe around this is that like understanding tech is one thing. Like it's one thing when like older people in our lives are like, oh, can you help me like BCC someone on this email? Like that's one thing. It's a whole other thing for people to understand how generative AI works and what it means for your image to be scraped in a data set. Like that's something that I probably would have to explain what that means to my parents. And that's not like their fault. Like I think even like friends of mine that are my age but don't work in tech might not totally get how AI works.
Right.
And I think this is the fundamental issue where like, yes, we are using these meta services for free and we are putting data into their products and we can't really fault them for scraping our stuff, but we can fault them for not making it clear to the users what they are like consenting to without consenting to their ability to consent to it.
Yeah, that's well put. Yeah, I think you're right that Meta could do a better job of doing that in the first place, but then maybe routinely checking in. Hey, are these the privacy settings that you still want? And here's exactly what this means. That is asking for a lot, because the company would rather not have you think about it again, almost certainly, and just keep those privacies set up so that it is public and they've got that data to train on, because that's valuable. We've seen AI companies scrambling to find new sources of information to help train their AIs, and Meta having access to this huge back catalog is a very valuable thing. So it's no surprise that they are leveraging their service and the honestly kind of horrible interactions that take place there. And that was my first thought. Honestly, I thought
there's going to be so many minions.
Yeah. Well, he's so mad. Oh my goodness. I need to use Meta's AI to make some minion.
There's a whole thing about Minion Jesus. I think the podcast Today Explained from Vox did like a whole explanation of how Minion Jesus has like made big strides on Facebook.
Oh my God, Minion Jesus. There you go.
Get ready.
Get ready, folks. Get ready, because you're going to have to learn about Minion Jesus. Well,
you've heard of Elf on the Shelf, but are you ready for Minion Jesus?
Minion Jesus. I don't think I am. Amanda Silberling, it is always a pleasure to have you on the show. Of course, folks can head to techcrunch.com to check out your work, but where else should they go to keep up with what you're doing?
Yes, you can find me on the internet, on the Twitter/X, which is at @asilbrights in the little thingy below me. I am always posting weird takes about many things because this brain does not stop. Yeah. And I have a podcast called Wow If True, which is an internet culture podcast. And you can find it wherever pods are cast, is what the kids are saying these days.
Nice. All right. We will see you next time. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
All right. We're going to take a quick break so I can tell you about our next sponsor. And then when we get back from the break, we will talk to Dan Moren, SixColors East Coast Bureau Chief, about the Apple event. This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Melissa, the data quality experts since 1985. Whether you need the full white glove service or just the nuts and bolts, Melissa is the best for your enterprise. Melissa has helped more than 10,000 businesses worldwide harness accurate data with their industry-leading solutions, processing more than 1 trillion address, email, name, and phone records. Melissa offers integrations and apps and platforms and spreadsheet editors such as Microsoft 365, Google Sheets, Dynamics 365, Esri, Stripe, and Shopify. And Melissa makes it easy for you to cleanse and standardize your data within popular platforms you're already using to help improve ROI, optimize business efficiency, and elevate the customer experience. Be sure to check out Melissa Marketplace, where you have on-demand access to premium third-party data to improve campaign performance, enhance data visualization, and drive better business decisions. Some of the resources you can choose from include consumer, property owner, and business contact data by industry, location, job title, and more than 400 other attributes. Global address database, which is a master list of 200 plus million verified USPS addresses and coverage for 40 plus countries. Plus USPS carrier route and boundaries, zip code data, parcel boundaries, plus other location data for the US and Canada. Melissa now offers transparent pricing for all of its services, so you can eliminate that guesswork when estimating your business budget. Melissa's services use secure encryption for all file transfers and an information security ecosystem that's built on the ISO 27001 framework. They also adhere to GDPR policies and maintain SOC 2 compliance. So get started today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. That's melissa.com/twit. And we thank Melissa for sponsoring this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. Alrighty, folks. So the Apple event took place. New products were announced. And, oh man, my journalist professors are like, let's not do passive voice. Anyway, and of course, the pre-orders are set to take place tomorrow as we record this episode on Thursday, September 12th. Joining us to talk about the event and kind of break down the post-show understanding of what was announced, but more importantly, maybe what we missed, is Dan Moren of SixColors. Hello, Dan.
Hello, Mikah. Have you got a little post-event glow time? Glow?
Can you tell?
I can see the aura around you. It's lovely. It looks great.
It was glow time, and it did glow. I think in the end, there were lots of bright colors of phones.
That's true.
But something that stood out to me was the way that Apple brought everything to everyone. Can you talk about how the phones are rather similar this year across the whole lineup.
Yeah, that's true. I think that in past years, we've seen big divisions between both the standard line, the iPhone 15 versus 15 Pro, 14 versus 14 Pro, et cetera, and even versus the sizes, right? The plus sizes or the Pro Max size. This year, it does feel like things are a bit more narrow. That gap has narrowed both between the individual sizes within a model and the models themselves. So, for example, last year, there was a pretty big disparity in terms of the processors in all the phones. The Pro units went ahead and got a A17 Pro processor, whereas the older iPhone 15 models were left like a generation behind. This year, we got the whole new A18 line, which is based on Apple's new 3nm process, the same stuff that underlays the M4 processors we've seen roll out in iPads earlier this year. And that came to all the phones, from the iPhone 16 at the low end all the way up to the iPhone 16 Pro Max. So that's one way. And a big reason for that is, as Apple like to talk about, Apple Intelligence, which is a huge push they're making with their AI features. They want to be sure that all of these phones, their newest, greatest phones, are capable of running Apple Intelligence features and running them well. And that means making sure they have the processor power for it, as well as making sure they have enough memory. There being sort of a 8 gig minimum sort of for that. So that's one way that we got everything for everybody. Another way is in some of the features that were rolled out this year. Again, last year, the iPhone 15 Pro got that fancy action button, and that trickled down this year to the iPhone 16, the base models. However, this year we also saw the introduction of a new button. Buttons. They're everywhere. I know. For years, no buttons. Now, all the buttons. Every year, new button for you. The camera control button, which is more than just a button. It is, in fact, a whole capacitive sensor that can be used to not only take pictures, but also adjust settings within the camera app. And that, too, came to the entire iPhone 16 line, from the base model iPhone 16 all the way up to the Pro Max, which is at times a surprise, because we did not necessarily, again, we've used to seeing these features come out the high end and then trickle down in the succeeding years to the base models. And then in addition to that, in between the sizes, we often find the Pro Max gets something more than the iPhone Pro of that year. This year, the 16 Pro and Pro Max both have essentially the same exact camera layout, which tends to be one of the big disparities between them. The iPhone 16 Pro got the 5x optical zoom option that was only on the Pro Max last year, and they both feature a new 48 megapixel, 48 megapixel fusion camera as their main camera, as well as upgraded 48 megapixel ultra wide lenses. So there really isn't as much to sort of, compare those two models. They are basically the same, aside from screen size and battery life, which is just sort of a function of how much you can fit in the size of phone that we're talking about. So, this seems to go back and forth for Apple. Some years there's bigger disparities between models. Some years there's fewer. I kind of prefer this way around, where I feel like the only choice is how big a phone do you want, and then you don't have to, oh no, I'm going to get the smaller phone, but I'll lose out on that 5x optical zoom. That's frustrating. I don't want to make that decision because I don't want a big phone. So that's a most of what we saw this year is stuff that sort of came across the line in a more holistic revamp of everything that's happening in the iPhone.
Yeah, I am pleased too, as someone who is asked, what device should I get? I think that in years past, there had to be lots of caveats included, and really more exploration of what the person needed. And this has just made it so much simpler, because in most cases, I can just offer the standard device as my recommendation, because it has so much of what you can expect. Yeah. And then it's been my experience at least, that people like color, and there are lots of color options that you get from the standard model. This year, things are pretty bleak color-wise for the Pro phones. But I wanted to know, is there anything that wasn't announced on stage for the phones that is worth talking about? Like, was there, some in the past, it's been like Oh, there's a thread border router inside of the iPhone, which again is the case this year, but that has already happened. Or the cellular is better, or there's a new ultrawide. Like any secretive stuff that people can get excited about, or is it pretty much they announced on stage what took place for those phones?
I think this year, a lot of what you're seeing is sort of, what you see is what you get. There is a report going around that the 16 Pro and Pro Max do have a new Qualcomm modem in them that may provide a boost in 5G speeds compared to their predecessors. Some of the reports on that, which were first reported by SpeedSmart, basically say on some networks you're going to see up to like maybe a 20-25% boost. That's always a little tricky to figure out based on, may depend on where you are, it may depend on the cell you're in, the provider you're in, how good your signal is, all of that. But it does seem like maybe that's one thing that's quietly been upgraded in the Pro models that isn't necessarily true in the straight iPhone 16 standard models. Other than that, though, it does feel very much kind of like it's a WYSIWYG kind of year. I mean, I think if Apple was trying to pull out every stop it had in terms of talking about new stuff on stage, and some stuff it's weird they didn't even really like quantify. Right? They're like, oh, it's got the best battery life ever. Moving on to other things like how much? Do you want to give us a number? Even a meaningless chart? Nope, didn't even want to do that. So yeah, I think a lot of the focus this year was on providing the best platform they felt like they could provide for this upcoming rollout of Apple Intelligence features.
Yeah. Now, that was an interesting aspect of this. For those of us who had watched the WWDC event, we would have seen we would have learned about Apple Intelligence and many of the features that some of us have been able to test in iOS 18.1 beta. But with that, there was an introduction of a couple of new features that use Apple Intelligence. Can you briefly discuss anything that, we're supposed to be able to expect as things go on?
Yeah, well, so again, we did see the full rollout of sort of Apple Intelligence back in June. This time around, we got largely a rehash of those kinds of features, and those features are rolling out over a long period of time, with the first ones expected to come in the 18.1 update next month, but then further updates adding features that haven't even yet been in beta testing, including some of those generative image features. So they talked once again about Genmoji, which is the ability to create custom emoji just using a text prompt. And they discussed their image playground feature, which lets you generate AI imagery in the way that we've seen with a lot of other, generative AI features. Beyond that, we also know that Siri has been promised to get a lot of these improvements in terms of being able to be more context aware and in terms of being able to kind of understand you better and pull up information from disparate sources on your phone. That's stuff that we haven't seen in the betas at all and might be rolling out sometime next year. It's kind of unclear even there when exactly the time frame is for that. So there wasn't necessarily a lot in there for those paying attention in terms of new Apple Intelligence features. We just got sort of that rundown again, but there are certainly a slew of features that are coming in short order to these all the devices, and it's going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot. This is not one of those years where they release a software update and they're like, we're done. It's over. No, you're going to be seeing these Apple Intelligence features roll out over the next many, many months.
Understood. The other, of course, there was introduction of new Apple Watches. I think when it comes to that, could you tell us just about anything there that maybe people didn't expect ahead of the rumors, and anything that kind of stood out to you, even in some disappointing aspects, like with the Ultra?
Yeah. I mean, well, starting with the Ultra, we nobody really expected a new model this year. They've revamped the Ultra the last 2 years. This year, they spent a lot of time talking about it, which is weird because it is physically the same device, but they added a new black finish to it, which, sure, if that's what you were looking for, it looks nice. They added some new bands that were sort of, inspired by their classic Milanese loop bands, a titanium base model, but there's not a lot there that really changed otherwise. In terms of the Series 10, some people had wondered if maybe the 10th anniversary of the Apple Watch's introduction would be a time to see a more comprehensive revamp of the Apple Watch. And we didn't really get that. We did get some slight changes in terms of size. Most notably, they're a lot thinner than the predecessors, as well as having slightly larger cases and bigger screens. And then we also saw, kind of surprisingly, Apple decided to off the stainless steel option in terms of cases. So you have your choice of aluminum or titanium now, but that's it, as well as in a variety of different finishes. One thing that I was really interested to see, I actually was just checking this out on the watchOS 11 beta, which is in there, is they added a Tides app. I guess they're really into, if you need tides, you're on surfing, you want to know about the tides, there's a whole app that Apple makes now for you. I guess as somebody, I do live near an ocean, but not an ocean with a lot of surfing. So I don't know that will be super handy for me, but it is in that beta if you want to check it out. And I think the biggest thing, the thing I did not expect, did not have on my bingo card this year, was the ability to listen to media through your Apple Watch speakers. Cool.
Yeah,
cool. Just a thing I really need. Love to get on the bus with people jamming out to their Apple Watch playing music,
listening to their Apple Watch near
up by your ear. That's right. That's the only way to listen. That's how you do it.
And then they're talking, and then the person, and and it's just like, oh my gosh,
it's the future we didn't know we wanted, Micah.
Oh, we definitely didn't know we wanted because we didn't want it.
Sorry, my bad. We didn't want it. That's right. Correct.
Last but not least, you just wrote this morning about an update to, I think it was this morning. You definitely just recently wrote on SixColors.
I just wrote right now as we were on the show. I'm that good.
About an update to Apple's announcement regarding how AirPods are going to offer some new functionality in the future. Could you tell us a little bit about that functionality and what the update is?
Yeah, absolutely. So of the AirPods that did not get updated in terms of hardware this year were the AirPods Pro 2. They did, however, get this big software push. Apple, I guess, didn't want them to feel left out, which is all these features related to acting as hearing aids. So this morning, the FDA officially approved this functionality, which allows AirPods 2 to act as hearing aids. It means that they can be used for a variety of features that increase people or help people with mild or moderate hearing loss understand things better. This is, part of this whole thing where the FDA has really loosened up restrictions on over-the-counter hearing aids, which I think is a really intriguing issue because it offers some more competition with those prescription-based hearing aids, which can often cost thousands upon thousands of dollars. Obviously, AirPods Pro considerably cheaper than that. Won't help everybody with sort of severe hearing loss, obviously, as well, but it is something that they're trying to take this multi-pronged approach with, not only being able to act as hearing aids, but also being able to prevent hearing loss potentially by adapting the audio that you are getting into your ears and preventing hearing damage, as well as offering a feature that lets you do an actual hearing test to determine whether or not you have started to lose hearing in your ears or not. So very much like the way you might go to an audiologist or something and have that test where they play a variety of frequencies for you and you try to gauge whether or not you can hear them. This should allow you to sort of get a better idea of your hearing health, and perhaps within consulting with a medical professional, figure out what the best steps are. But it's a exciting and interesting moment, and Apple obviously has been big on health tech in the last several years, and this is kind of seems to be their latest area of pushing, and I'm very interested to see what comes of it when that feature actually starts shipping.
Indeed. Dan, I want to thank you so much for taking some time to join us today. Of course, folks can head over to sixcolors.com to get the full scoop on what Apple announced, as well as I'm sure we'll see wonderful reviews of these devices just as soon as that embargo drops. If folks want to stay up to date with what you're doing online, where do they go to do that?
You can find me on most social media networks as D. Moren, Threads, Blue Sky, Mastodon. I'm also on the web at dmoren.com, where you can find links to everything that I do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dan, for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Micah.
Talk to you soon. All right, we're going to take a quick break before we come back with our final interview of the day. I want to take a moment to tell you about our final sponsor of this episode. It's ThreatLocker, who are bringing you this episode of Tech News Weekly. Do zero-day exploits and supply chain attacks keep you up at night? I can imagine that they do, but worry no more, because you can harden your security with ThreatLocker. Worldwide companies like JetBlue trust ThreatLocker to secure their data and keep their business operations flying high. Imagine taking a proactive deny-by-default approach to cybersecurity, blocking every action, process, and user unless authorized by your team. ThreatLocker helps you do this and provides a full audit of every action for risk management and compliance. Their 24/7 US-based support team fully supports onboarding and beyond. Stop the exploitation of trusted applications within your organization and keep your business secure and protected from ransomware. Organizations across any industry can benefit from ThreatLocker's ring fencing by isolating critical and trusted applications from unintended uses or weaponization and limiting attackers' lateral movements within their network. ThreatLocker's ring fencing, super cool, it was able to foil a number of attacks that were not stopped by traditional EDR. In fact, the 2020 cyber attack on SolarWinds Orion was foiled by ring fencing. And ThreatLocker works for Macs, too. Get unprecedented visibility and control of your cybersecurity quickly, easily, and cost-effectively. ThreatLocker's zero-trust endpoint protection platform offers a unified approach to protecting users, devices, and networks against the exploitation of zero-day vulnerabilities. Get a free 30-day trial and learn more about how ThreatLocker can help mitigate unknown threats and ensure compliance. Visit ThreatLocker.com. That's ThreatLocker.com. And we thank ThreatLocker for sponsoring this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. All right, we are back from the break, and now it's time to talk about something you may or may not have heard about, but Sony definitely wants you to know about. It is the new PS5 Pro. Joining us to talk about what's new and what you can expect from the device is Kyle Orland, joining us from Ars Technica. Welcome back to the show, Kyle.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mikah.
Yeah, pleasure to have you here. So I would love to just get right into it. First and foremost, we've got a new PS5 Pro, and that must mean that it's got new stuff going on. What are the key hardware upgrades for this device, and how do they actually enhance gaming performance compared to the PS5 that people fought tooth and nail to get when it first came out?
Yeah, this upgrade is all about graphics. They're focused on a larger GPU, which has, I have the numbers here to the side, 45% faster rendering, 67% more compute units, 28% faster video RAM. It all just means better graphics. The target that Sony focused on in their presentation was kind of getting rid of that choice between performance mode and fidelity mode. So fidelity mode would have higher resolutions, but maybe limited to 30 frames per second. Performance mode, you'd get that smooth 60 frames per second, but you might see resolutions a little lower. They want the best of both worlds. They want approaching 4K graphics at 60 frames per second in the highest end games, and that's what they're promising the PS5 Pro will deliver. Approaching 4K graphics.
Can you tell me how that translates if I have many a modern TV that is a 4K television. I plug in this PS5 Pro. It does 60 frames per second. It supports 60 frames per second. What am I working with in one of these games?
So it totally depends on the games. I wasn't counting the lines of pixels or anything on this. They have to wait until it comes out to get the full spectrum. But, some of the games might be natively 1440p instead of, 2000 lines. They do have an upsampling system there called PSSR, PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution. I think it stands for. And they say it's an AI-powered upscaling algorithm where it looks at the raw pixels and kind of fills in those pixels to get it to a 4K image, automatically, trying to figure out what color would go on that little edge of the line and then smooth it out. This is especially useful, they say, in crowd scenes, like for far off things in the distance. In a game like Ratchet and Clank, you might see sharper people in the stands. I'm not sure how much that's really going to impact the average viewer, unless you're sitting very close to a very large screen. I'm not really sure that you'll be able to pick out that kind of upsampling. You might get kind of a feeling for it. You might think, oh, something is a little different here, but with the AI super sampling I've seen, it can get a little fuzzy. It's not really a night and day difference that they might want you to think.
Understood. Now, let's talk about what, for me as a person who's not super steeped in graphics performance and GPUs and everything else, ray tracing seems like quite the buzzword. And it seems like it's akin to hearing every big tech company talk about AI right now. Can you just give me a basic understanding of ray tracing, and then what is going on with the PS5 Pro in terms of its improved GPU and how that is ramped up in terms of ray tracing and higher frame rates?
Ray tracing, the simplest way of thinking of it is calculating every ray of light coming from a light source and how it bounces off a number of things in the environment, sometimes, up to 5-7 bounces. Oh, wow. So like on a shiny car in Gran Turismo, before you would see, it's kind of reflective, but now you'll actually see the reflection of the car next to you in ray tracing, and that reflection will bounce back and so forth. It ends up being much more realistic. Your mind tends to notice when these things aren't reflecting correctly because you have a lifetime of experience seeing shiny objects reflecting the world, whereas they've had to come up with tricks before ray tracing. The PS5 Pro says it'll be, I think, 50% faster at this. So you can have the ray tracing effects while keeping that 60 frames per second. You might be able to do ray tracing in more games. You might have more realistic shadows in a game because it also calculates when the light isn't hitting something, like if it's blocked by a tree or another wall. I think that is the kind of thing you'll notice if you turn ray tracing on or off in a game. You really can see, it's not sharper or anything, but it just looks more realistic. It looks more like you're used to things looking in the real world. I think with the extra power of the PS5 Pro, I hope more developers will be able to use it without, taking a frame rate hit.
Understood. Now, I would imagine that this list is going to increase over time. What games are set to be, quote, PS5 Pro enhanced? And then, or maybe you can name a couple. And then what exactly is that going to mean? How will they take advantage of the new hardware?
Yeah, I think there was a list of, they said 50 games would be available, and it's pretty much all the biggest ones you can name will have it. Spider-Man 2, Ratchet and Clank, Last of Us Part 2. I'm trying to remember what else was on there, but the biggest games will definitely get these enhancements. Mm-hmm. I think as time goes on and the PS5 Pro gets into more households, more developers, maybe smaller developers, will also get those enhancements. But Sony also says that even if you don't tune the game for these enhancements, you'll be able to get upscaling upgrades on games that are not tuned for it, or even older PS4 games will supposedly look better with PS5 Pro. So we'll see how that goes once we have it in our hands, of course.
Understood. Now, you did mention the PSSR, PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution. So is this an upscaling system that they just have kind of given a unique name? And how would it compare then to something like, for example, again, this is coming from a layperson, a DVD, and I mean a literal DVD, not even Blu-ray, a DVD player that has 1080p upscaling, for example?
Yeah, that's a good comparison. If you have an old DVD that, not even a Blu-ray, that was designed for your tube TV, and you have an upscaling Blu-ray player, it won't make it look like a Blu-ray. You will definitely tell the difference if you had something that was sampled at that 1080p, but it'll make it look nicer. It'll make it look a little sharper around the edges, and that's what you'll pretty much see with PSSR. It's the same type of thing that NVIDIA has been doing for a long time with super sampling on its graphics drivers. And the idea is that it allows the game itself to be rendered at a lower resolution, and then it kind of fills in the gaps quickly, which allows for, again, faster frame rates. I really want to see how this looks when it's actually in my living room, because in the past I've seen sometimes it works very well, and sometimes you see a lot of kind of fuzziness, a kind of crosshatch patterns where the AI is trying to fill in pixels and it's not really doing it well. Things have improved recently as machine learning is getting better, and hopefully Sony has learn from some of that experience.
Understood. Now, let's talk about the big thing that sticks out here. The thing that seems to be getting people upset. Pricing. How does the PS5 Pro's pricing and kind of its positioning as this elite graphics package compare to other consoles that are on the market? You know, the Xbox Series X, Xbox Series S, and maybe even upcoming hardware that we are expecting from Nintendo or other players in the space, because there are also a lot of mobile device manufacturers that are working on, you know, making their consoles better. Where does this fit in the lineup, and what do you think about the price with your knowledge of kind of the gaming landscape?
Yeah, so the PS5 Pro is being offered at $700, and that is without a disc drive. If you want to play discs, you have an extra $80 on top of that. So when you compare that to $450 for the disc-free PS5, that's a big ask, $250 extra dollars. At that price, it's really going to be for the graphics heads, the people who really want top of the line. Price is not important. You know, Sony did this before with the PS4 Pro, and as another mid-generation upgrade that also cost more. I think the PS4 Pro ended up being about 20% of all PS4s sold. So this is not the mass market device. This is for the niche, even within console gamers, of people who want just the best of the best. That said, there is a bit of sticker shock there. I think the last $700 console was the 3DO back in the 90s, and that's when $700 was, you know, a huge amount, and the 3DO obviously failed very quickly, partly because it was so expensive. But $700 is not what it used to be. Just if you adjust for inflation, since the PS5 launched, the $500 that it cost then is more like $600 in today's money. So, you know, I can see why they're charging that much, but also I don't think they're really aiming for a mass market price here. They're aiming at people where price is pretty much no object. They just want to show off. They want to know I have the best graphics. And they also want to know that this is a product that will last into the future, that, in 4 years, maybe $700 will not seem as much, or maybe they'll be able to reduce the cost. And this is preparing for that kind of interregnum between when the PS6 eventually comes out.
Got it. And then last but not least, I'll ask you, with the PS5 Pro being a mid-generation upgrade, what do you think it says about Sony's strategy for extending the PS5's life cycle as opposed to, PS6 and beyond?
Right. Yeah, like I said, they did this before with the PS4 Pro, but that didn't really extend how long the PS4 was on the market. It was still the same 6 or 7 years that we've seen between major console releases. And, that was partly driven by Microsoft releasing their new console. Both of them saw each other and said, oh, they're thinking about a new console, we have to do ours. Now, this time around, Microsoft is not doing a mid-generation upgrade, or has shown no signs of it yet, at least. So that leads to an interesting scenario. If Microsoft has been releasing more of its games on other consoles, its sales of the Xbox have been cratering well below expectations, there's a chance that we might not see another Xbox, or it might not be pushing the state-of-the-art anymore. They might go more of a Switch route and focus on portables or something. If there isn't that push for Sony, it's hard to know where they're going to go with their next generation. Will they want to release a PS6 as quickly? Will the diminishing returns that they're getting from investing in all this hardware kind of lower the number of people who want a top-of-the-line system? Nintendo's new Switch will be coming out next year, most likely. And there's the Steam Deck as a competition too now. It seems like there's a divergence between, PS5 Pro at the high end really serving those people who care about having the most, and then things like the Switch and the Steam Deck, where it's lower end, but it's more convenient because you can play it portably and because it's much cheaper. So there's going to be a real divergence in the market there, and what Microsoft does will have a large impact on how quickly I think Sony will move.
Makes sense. Kyle, I want to thank you so much for taking some time to join us today to talk us through the PS5 Pro, helping me truly understand what ray tracing means and why it matters, and also some great details on PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution and what upscaling means when we're talking about something at this level. Of course, folks should head over to arstechnica.com to check out the great work that you're doing. Is that the place that they should go to keep up with what you're doing, or do you have any place online that they can go as well?
Yeah, that's where all my professional writing goes. You can also find me on Blue Sky, kyleor.land, which is my fun little URL that I just got.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. And see you online.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kyle. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Mikah.
Alrighty, folks, and with that, we have reached the end of this episode of Tech News Weekly. The show publishes every Thursday at twit.tv/TNW. That is where you can go to subscribe to the show in audio and video formats, and we'd love it if you did. I also want to mention Club Twit at twit.tv/clubtwit. When you join the club, it's just $7 a month, and joining the club gets you access to some awesome benefits. You can get ad-free episodes of every single one of our shows. You can also get access to the Twit Plus bonus feed that has extra content you won't find anywhere else. Behind the scenes, before the show, after the show, special Club Twit events get published there. You also can check out the Club Twit Discord server, a fun place to go to chat with your fellow Club Twit members and those of us here at Twit, and access to the video versions of our Club Twit exclusive shows. We would love to see you in the club, and we thank you for your support if you are in the club. Again, twit.tv/clubtwit, just $7 a month. If you'd like to follow me online, I'm at Mikah Sargent on many a social media network, or you can head to chihuahua.coffee. That's chihuahua.coffee, where I've got links to the places I'm most active online. Check out iOS Today, which will publish later today, Hands on Mac, which will also publish later today, and tune in on Sundays to watch Hands on Tech, which is the show where I do gadget reviews and take your questions and do my best to answer them. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you again next week for another episode of Tech News Weekly. Bye-bye.